Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for our latest iteration of our Musician Monday, where we have the pleasure of interviewing some of our musician friends and also hearing some of their music and discussing even some orthopedic maladies that affect the shoulder, elbow, and hand. And so welcome and thank you for listening in. I have the distinct pleasure tonight to interview and discuss and cover all sorts of ideas and musical explorations with my friend, Nathan Williams, who is an amazing clarinetist. And we met back in 2019 and way before the pandemic that has affected us all. Hence, we are sitting here. You can't see his handsome face because we're wearing masks, but that's okay. We'll get through this anyway. So Nathan, thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate this. As you know, you've helped us and forwarded our cause, Musician Treatment Foundation, to many of your friends, and we really appreciate you being here. We are effectively socially distanced. We're wearing our masks, so we are not spreading this terrible virus. Hopefully, we're on our way with some vaccinations coming and here, but not happening quite fast enough. So we will get through this and try to still enjoy ourselves and then hear some of your music and also some of your story. So for the starters, just please tell our viewers who you are and a little bit about your career and history.
I am principal clarinetist with a chamber orchestra in Houston called ROCO, River Oaks Chamber Orchestra. And I'm the clarinetist with a trio, Strata. We've been playing together now for 30 years. We met in grad school, and we're based in Washington, D.C. So my career involves a lot of travel, not just back and forth for different endeavors with my trio and with my chamber orchestra, but I've done quite a lot of traveling to perform and teach. I've been very fortunate to play around the country and in Europe and Asia, giving master classes and playing as a soloist and in chamber music. So it's continues to be a really interesting and varied career, and I'm grateful for every second, even during the pandemic, that things can continue via live streaming and virtual connection.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad you're able to still carry on to some degree.
Absolutely.
Obviously, travel has been truncated, live music has been devastated, but we carry on. And so tell us how the logistics of your playing and your career have changed. I think the obvious ones are no travel and no live music, but how has it affected you in terms of both your amount of playing, your teaching, and even your creative process?
It's had a powerful influence in all those areas in ways for which I find myself so grateful. And I think that moving forward, I really trust that we're going to be better off for it, even though there are definitely times that it's quite difficult to keep that kind of positive eye. When this all first came down in our country, I was actually away on tour with my trio. And we found ourselves with a string of 5 performances within a 10-day period. And even as I left, as fearless a traveler as I am, and as excited as I was about the events that were coming up, because of all the news that had begun to arrive about all the unknowns and all the uncertainty about this virus, it was not without some degree of reservation, that I got on the plane to leave to go on this trip. And then within 5 days, everything had been canceled. The calls started coming in, and we actually did have one of those performances that came through. The rest of them all just fell apart. And I ended up changing my flight so that I could come home early. That was on March 13th.
Wow.
And the next week, news started coming in of further cancellations. The next week, even more cancellations. And I initially, and certainly this ties in my own experience on all this very, very closely with some of the physical challenges that I had that you certainly helped me to address. So that's another part of this experience that's very singular for me. But beyond that, as all these cancellations came in, and suddenly there was just so much time. I don't ever remember in my lifetime there being so much time available, so much time at home. And my initial response was to just start making lists and planning all the different projects. What have I always wanted to do with this time that I could do, that I haven't had time for, that I haven't prioritized to make time for? And so the first couple of days of all this, I was pretty excited. And then I woke up, I think it was about the third or fourth day, I woke up and I just felt kind of paralyzed emotionally. Like I just thought it was just so hard to get out of bed. And I fought it. I really fought it because I just, I thought, okay, this is not who I am, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then I just took a deep breath and thought, I'm going to allow myself to give into this because we have this time and it's something that I'm feeling in a very, very, gut level.
Right.
And frankly, I just kind of crawled up in a fetal position for about 48 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, I felt like it was an enormous victory on both those days during that period of time, just to get up and take a shower and go out and walk my dog.
Wow.
And, but then once I moved through that, I just started looking for different ways to move through it and solve things. And I had been teaching via live stream, mostly via Skype and FaceTime until the pandemic. And then everything transitioned quite rapidly to Zoom. But regardless of the means, I had been doing quite a lot of remote teaching for people who were in other places and wanted to have get some feedback. And so that was a very smooth transition. Obviously, with all the concerts canceled and preparing for those concerts and looking forward to those concerts, that was a disappointment, but also in my case, a great gift because of the challenges that I was experiencing at the time. And then moving forward, I've been so lucky that my chamber orchestra in Houston has met this with so much creativity and so much determination, whereas there have been other arts organizations that have just kind of given up and left their musicians out to dry. And but my chamber orchestra has put protocols in place, and they immediately formed a COVID committee to figure out ways. And so we have continued to perform. We played at an outdoor pavilion just north of Houston for our season opening concerts in September. Of course, we're more than 6 feet apart because of all the extra aerosols that wind players
I
and
was just
brass
going to bring
players
that
deal
up. Yes, good.
And everyone is masked at all times except when we're playing. So wind and brass players are exempt from wearing masks while we're playing. But everyone in the string section, percussionists, if there's a pianist involved, they're all wearing masks. Everything's wiped down. We have to clear the space for certain periods of time. But everyone's been great, very flexible, just incredibly grateful for the fact that we continue to do this. My trio, every series that my trio was contracted to play on this year so far has gone virtual. So instead of canceling it, we've moved through either doing things in real time via live stream, or most recently we pre-recorded a concert and then it was streamed a couple of weeks ago.
Now, have those, obviously the amount of revenues that anyone who's contracting you can generate theoretically or less with the live streams versus the live audiences. Has that altered your income, not to become too personal, but in general for your chamber orchestra, does that, or your trio, does that, how does that alter the finances of getting through, the pandemic?
That played a large part to my 48 hours spent in the fetal position. Because as things were canceled, and then I saw the loss of 2 summer festivals that I participate in regularly, then I was looking ahead at least several months from income that I had been counting on that would sustain me to zero. And so that was definitely something to work through. As far as the organizations that I'm involved with, ROCO fortunately is more donor-based rather than dependent on ticket sales. So that has really helped us to survive. And I am just thankful for whatever miracles, whatever angelic patrons have allowed these series that I've been a part of to continue, because we all know personally, and so many people who are who continue to be pretty devastated from all of this. And
it's interesting you bring that up. From the point of view of the donor base that keeps so much of music, especially classical music, going. I think initially it's altruism that keeps the money flowing in, because you want to keep it going, and that the musicians have been devastated by the loss of the touring income and so forth, and the venues like the Parker Jazz Club having no live music, which these aren't huge places, so they need to be filled and they need to be frequent.
Right.
And so I think what's interesting is, from a donor perspective, yes, there's still the altruistic component, but then there's also a desperate need to hear music, because one gets so much, non-musicians derive so much pleasure and peace and centering from music.
Absolutely.
And so to be there imbued with it real time in the live venues is totally different experience than listening to it on a CD or an LP or streaming.
Or even streaming.
Yeah. And so I think I would hope that's the idea that keeps pushing us forward and keeping live music on the horizon rather than dying, withering on the vine, because there's no more support of it. And
that's a two-way street, that interaction. I mean, for audiences to hear the live music, but for us to have live audiences. No matter how much we get pumped up, and I imagine, a packed house, and I just really do my best to get that energy. It just isn't the same as feeding off that energy in the moment. And regardless of how high and constantly, heightening bar to which I hold myself, there's nothing like the physical presence of other people to just really, up that extra notch of, good adrenaline that helps you to better your best. And so it's a two-way street, and we miss the presence of the audiences as well.
Yes. Well, that being said, before we continue, and this is a fascinating conversation, really appreciate it. We have an extremely large live audience today. You have me, you have our amazing videographer, you have Chris Kimura, the owner and person who created Parker Jazz Club, and Irene over there, who is our executive director of the Musician Treatment Foundation. Right. So it's a huge crowd. So we really want you to perform something for us.
And it's a great crowd. So I'm glad you're here.
And so please perform something for us.
Okay,
and we will enjoy that.
The first thing I'd like to share with you all this afternoon is a piece by Bela Kovac, who was professor for many years of clarinet at the Conservatory in Budapest, Hungary. He's also a really wonderful composer, and chose to write a series of tributes to a number of classical composers, including an homage to Bach, which is the work that I'd like to play for you this afternoon. Although it's written by Bela Kovac, it's very definitely written in the style of Bach. So for any listeners who are familiar with Bach's music, and I'm sure there are many, many of you out there, I'm sure you'll hear the similarities.
Thank you. That was amazing. And we will do more of this. We'll hear more from you. But let's continue the conversation, because some of your statements and observations have been amazing with regard to the effects of COVID. But you have told me multiple times that this sort of intertwined and was affected by also your hand problem.
Right.
And,
very much so.
And so tell us a little bit about the evolution of that. And then I'll discuss in a little greater detail from a purely surgical point of view what was going on. But please tell us what you experienced and how that interplay with COVID took place.
I first started noticing a shift in the response of my ring finger and pinky on my right hand in 2018. And I've traced it back to a specific moment when I first started to prepare my part to a trio by Bartók, Contrast for clarinet, violin, piano, a piece that I have played multiple times for decades, mostly with my trio strata, but with other people as well. So it's definitely a piece of repertoire that comes up often. And so because of that, my preparation time is different than if I were learning something for the very first time. And so it's more geared toward, my preparation is geared more toward just reinforcement and insurance, knowing that you're not wondering how it's going to go this time, but it's just reinforcement rather than learning. So I began to, the very first time I came back to it, I noticed this one particular passage, suddenly these two fingers were not lifting the way they normally did. And I was disconcerted. I thought, well, that's odd. What's going on? And it continued, but it impacted my approach to practicing. And I practiced through it and practiced around it, and it was fine. But I noticed it, and it was there. And this began a very, very gradual process that was known only to me. I really didn't want to speak to anyone about it because things turn into wildfires, and suddenly, well, Nathan Williams can't play anymore. And, right. So I just thought, okay, we'll see what happens, because maybe this will go away. I couldn't trace it to any sort of injury or anything. It just happened. So I'll fast forward after a very, very gradual, I started inventing different exercises to try to help with it. And then by April of 2019, March, April of 2019, it was really undeniable that something was going on. And so I did seek out advice from a couple of doctors who I think, I certainly mean no disrespect. I mean, in the same way that I'm not the musician and I'm not the teacher for everyone, I think just because you go see a doctor and maybe they don't diagnose things exactly right, it doesn't mean they don't know what they're talking about, but just don't really understand what it is you're dealing with. But I did find, by way of just sort of sleuthing, a hand therapist who really it helped a lot. I think in looking back, some of that was actually helpful physically. An enormous aspect of it was just the power of the psychology of knowing that I was being proactive, doing something. And so at that point, it was like, well, I'm doing everything I can do. That means a lot. I was still at a point in all this, as I remained, until the fall of 2019, where when I was practicing, I would notice it a lot. I would go into a rehearsal or a live performance situation, not even give it a second thought, because your focus just goes somewhere else. And it was mind over matter. And then it was around that time that I learned about you, and I learned about your practice. And so that's when, I think it was in April of 2019 that we met. And I knew that, during that encounter, and then when I left, that something really meaningful and extraordinary had just happened, because you heard me and you saw me and you understood what was happening, but were really clear that there were different ways that it could go and reveal it. And as if it went in this direction, it would reveal itself to be this issue. If it were in another direction, it would be something else. But it was just clear that you were going to listen to what was happening as well. So I felt really encouraged by that.
So one thing I would say is, just from your story so far, and this is similar to the story you told me initially, that those are subtle clues, but you were talking about how they were not just moving subtly properly and for your very fine musical repetitive movements. So what's interesting is that most people who are not musicians are not going to notice something like that.
That's right.
Because they're not doing anything so repetitive as that. And so a subtle problem that most of us will not notice are going to be noticed much earlier by musicians because of the kind of use patterns that you have. And so it's fascinating. It's always fascinating to me, because it's just very, very different can of worms, if you will.
Absolutely.
So
it impacted no other area of my life other than when I was with my instrument. Even sitting at the piano, I could play scales and it didn't bother me, but it was really specifically the sealing of an opening called a tone hole on the clarinet with this finger, and then the control of movement of my pinky. And by July and August of 2019, I just felt that this finger had a mind of its own, and that it might just inexplicably and uncontrollably leap up. I was able to move through it, and but every rehearsal, every concert just felt like I was getting closer and closer to the edge of the cliff.
And so it was starting to get into your head.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the timing of this is just so uncanny that by the time that series of concerts with my trio rolled around in March, I was at the very end of what I was physically able to do with the instrument. And they, people who have known me for over 30 years, people who know me not only personally, but so well as a musician, as a player, had been completely unable to detect anything, even though I'd spoken with them about it. And it got to the point then they knew. And there had been no pain up until this time, but at this point, there would be cramping and terrible pain. And I barely made it through that concert without any issues. And then 2 weeks later, I had surgery.
Yes. So cramping and pain is the next heralding event, right? It's a little discoordination, a lack of that perfect fluidity that only you could notice. Then you have some cramping and pain, which is much more disconcerting, because it's a symptom that's not just about playing, and it becomes more manifest. Then that might be something that the rest of us might see just from handwriting, a lot, or doing other repetitive movements, right? So you already knew what you had. I knew what you had, and it was you're fine if I say what it was, correct?
Sure.
Yeah. So
That's
it's
fine.
an ulnar neuropathy, which is the ulnar nerve, which is the funny bone nerve, comes by the elbow, and then it passes down the forearm and supplies the feeling in these two fingers and the intrinsic muscle, most of the intrinsic muscles of the hand, the ones that allow us to cross our fingers, do all the cool movements that just the large extrinsic muscles do, that move our fingers kind of open and close. And these are the more subtle movements that obviously a fine musician needs critically. And it's a compression of the nerve. So you decided to go forth and have a decompression of that, which is, again, if someone comes in and says, hey, my fingers, I can't feel them, I can't use them, I can't tie my shoes, when I talk on the phone, it goes totally numb. And I wake up in the morning after sleeping, it goes totally numb. You weren't there.
I had none of that.
Yeah. And so my job is to be careful and know that that's the problem. If it's those extreme cases, it's a no-brainer, right? Mm-hmm. But for these, you have to know, and that's why we had lengthy discussions about it. You have to know that relieving that pressure is a subtle, gradual improvement, mm-hmm. and you have to continue pushing through and playing and teaching and doing everything you do. So tell us a little bit more about that experience.
Well, the rehabilitation has been fascinating and pretty life-changing because I've learned so much more than I knew before about how technique works, how the clarinet works, and how, certain combinations that I'd pretty much taken for granted for most of my life became things that I would really think about. Mm-hmm. And so the surgery, I believe, was on Friday. By Tuesday, I was playing a little bit again, mm-hmm. and then I continued to play. I think there was only one period of time during the summer at all that I actually decided, okay, for 1 week, I'm not going to play. Mm-hmm. And that was more for psychological reasons than I think for physical reasons. But it's been something that has come back gradually, mm-hmm. and especially in the earlier stages of rehab, there were times that I plateaued and I wanted so badly for the improvement to be mm-hmm. a lot more immediate. And it was in a conversation that we had during one of those periods of plateau when you made a point to me that really just turned everything around. And I continue to think about this, and I've actually talked with my students about this very regularly. When you said, musicians have a great tendency to focus on what they can't do. And when you're you really want to address that. And so there's so much motivation surrounding something that you can't do or you don't do as well as you want. Even if everybody else thinks it's great, Mm-hmm. And what happens if you think about the things that you can do, and then maybe start thinking about the things that you can do now that you couldn't do a week before the surgery or a month before the surgery. And so that really turned everything around, and from that moment on, but I mean, especially the next day, when we came back to playing, it was a lot better. So I had these definite periods. There was a period in May, then there was another one, I think, in early July, definitely in mid-August, and then again in October, when there were just these days when I would assemble my instrument and start to play that just suddenly it was like, I can do so much more. And I specifically remember in early August a day that I just, one would think that probably complex technical passages would ultimately, in the period of rehab, be much more difficult than to simply cover tone holes and just sustain one note. I found the opposite to be true because the motion is one thing, but the strength that I always took for granted that it took just to be stable and still and sustain a note was something that took a little bit longer to come back. But anyway, it's been a very gradual thing. I used a plateau system clarinet for about 3 weeks in September with closed tone holes on the right side, just to make sure that there wouldn't be any issues on my first concerts back. And then I moved away from that. And now I'm just in this place where I feel like every day I'm aware of increasing strength, increasing possibility, right. And I think I'm at a better place now than I have been for at least 2 years.
Fantastic. Well, and just to be clear, that was totally selfish, me telling you that, because I was just getting tired of the frowny emojis that you were sending me all the time, right? Yeah, right. And you were saying, what did you do to me? And so frankly, it was just like, come on, let's focus here on the positive. No, I'm kidding. No, that's great. But it is a long process. Just one little bit of science is that the nerve fibers that are compressed, once they are decompressed, it takes them, they grow back like a salamander's tail, but they grow only at 1 inch per month. So on a long arm like yours, it's months for that to march down and get to the hand, which is really manifesting the problem. So patience is a virtue for sure. And that's the biggest part of my job is getting you through that period where you're frustrated and not feeling enough positive change, right?
And we talked earlier about, being really depressed and loss of income and all that. The other side of that for me was that just in my case, the timing of all those cancellations really couldn't have been better in terms of my healing process because I didn't have to cancel anything. Everything was canceled for me.
And I will say that you are not the only one. I mean,
course.
I've seen it during COVID. I've been pretty busy with a lot of musicians who never before had the time to set aside for recovery of a even more complicated than you had, reconstructive procedures that they said, look, you know, I don't have any gigs for 4 months, so, or at least 4 months. So let's get it done. And the only other thing I would throw out, which you can appreciate, the average pre-COVID, the average annual income of a freelance musician in Austin, professional musician, $16,000 a year, the average income. Think about that, how that hand-to-mouth existence was devastated by the loss of the touring income, the loss of income like at the Parker Jazz Club and so forth. And this is where the heartache comes. And we just have to keep the music playing. We have to keep it going, not just by surgery, but by all of us banding together and keeping this going. So thank you so much. We want to hear more music from you and see how those fingers are really working again. And so thank you so much. And thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much.
It's been a real pleasure. And we really appreciate your candor, your insights and intelligence about this. And so we'll see more of you in the future.
Okay, great. I look forward to it.
So finally today, I would like to play 2 pieces by Igor Stravinsky from his 3 pieces for solo clarinet. He wrote these pieces as a gift for a gentleman who had been a very generous donor to a couple of large projects, who was an amateur clarinetist himself. And one of the reasons I thought it would be fun to play these today is because we're in this wonderful Parker Jazz Club, and Stravinsky's music was so often directly influenced by American jazz and American ragtime. And the first 2 pieces in this set of 3 pieces are very definitely improvisatory in nature, although he wrote very, very specifically and really thought performers of his music should act as executioners and not interpreters and do everything exactly as he wrote it. But it's not really a stretch to imagine, a clarinet player sitting on the edge of a stage before a jazz set, just kind of quietly playing to him or herself. So I hope you enjoy these first 2 of the Stravinsky 3 pieces. That's it. I'm just so excited to be able to play those pieces again, and even just playing, especially the Kovacs piece based on the writing of Bach. That was a piece that I played a couple of times in July and August of 2019, and since that time really had just been completely unable to control technically. And so when we talked this past weekend about the possibility of doing this today, I was thinking about things to include, and I thought it would be really great to be able to include that Kovacs Bach homage because I hadn't been able to play it. And I thought, well, let me see if I can do that, and it would be really good in terms of the time framework and also a really cool piece. And so yeah, when I played it today, I just sort of felt like it was really hard not to cry because I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's working. I can do this, and it's going to keep getting better. And so it's really exciting. It feels good. And the Stravinsky, was included on a concert in November of 2019. And to the points that we were making earlier about how interesting it is, the difference between playing technical passages and then just simply sustaining a note. In the first of those pieces, which is technically not complicated to play, I found myself really having to concentrate hard just to keep those two fingers down in November of 2019. And now, they're...
So there's a confidence building.
Oh, absolutely.
Where
absolutely.
You can think less and less about it.
Yes.
Worry less and less
Yes.
about it.
Because that's not where you want your focus to be. You never want to be walking out to play wondering how it's going to go. You know what I mean?
It's
you need to be
effortless.
so
It's
proud.
You don't ever think about these
Right,
moments before.
right.
Yeah. Very
So
cool.
it's a process, but it's an exciting one.
Yeah. Well, fantastic. Thank you. My gosh. That's
Sure.
Beautiful.